The rules of engagement for the right. The right has been disadvantaged by not having a clear strategy. It has enabled the left to infiltrate the right. This has happened in the churches and in politics and in economics. The right has not had an exclusionary strategy. The left is all about diversity and inclusion, even while they tend to exclude and try and create homogeneity in the three previously mentioned areas of economics, politics, and religion. But the right is about exclusion. We're about division, because we are about homogeneity within the right, but division from the left. We aren't consistent with the left. We need to divide from the left. So our strategy should be focused on dividing ourselves from the left and identifying in what way we are different and explaining how we can overcome this kind of sucking in, this elimination of our identity that the left is occupied in. So these are just a list of different ideas or rules to follow that will give us a clear and distinct strategy from the left. Strategy has to be used in any conflict. In any conflict, we need to have a set of rules, a set of principles to be governed by. Guerrilla warfare is the rule, not direct conflict, when outright victory is uncertain. We need to fight smart, not hard. We need to define our objectives individually and collectively. Understand what you are fighting for. Do not fight for what is not strategically required. Prioritize your fight. Wars and battles cost money. Determine the cost of a battle and its potential benefit or loss before engaging. A battle is a business proposition. Treat an engagement as a marketing decision or an investment proposal. Do not fight the other man's war. Pick your fight. Never fight the owner in his house. Never fight for what belongs to your enemy. Never fight for what you do not actually want. Never fight the red flag the enemy waves at you. Learn the enemy's strongholds. Never attack the enemy's stronghold at their strongest point. Wars are won by attrition. Never commit all of your forces in an attack unless the enemy will be wiped out. It is more important to know yourself than the enemy. In the final battle, we are always fighting ourselves. Learn who you are. Learn your weaknesses as well as your strength. If you are your enemy, you will not win the war, as the enemy, as your enemy, will have you fighting for them. Ask yourself, who are you? What are you fighting for? What are you fighting with? What will the battle cost? How do you intend to pay the cost of any engagement contemplated? A war is a luxury product, not a necessity. If you cannot afford it, do not buy it. Only fight for what you are fighting for. Never fight for what you are not fighting for. Know your product. Your product is what a war produces. The war consumes resources to create a product. Ensure that the product is one worth that the investment will be. What is the cost of failure? What is the cost of success? Wars are lost from fighting for the wrong things. A war with the wrong objectives is a war that has no relevance. Fight for what the enemy has no interest in. Never fight for what will produce resistance if it can be avoided. Why are you after the same things that your enemy wants? Fight for what you own. Fight for what is yours by right. The only thing worth fighting for is what you own. You own only what you have authored. Fighting for what authored is a fight for justice. When you fight for what you authored, you are fighting for justice. The righteous fight for justice. The unrighteous fight for freedom. Fight for justice. Let the enemy fight for freedom. Justice gives you what is yours. Justice permits your enemy to keep what is theirs. Your enemy is your enemy only because your enemy has what you authored or wants what you authored. The only just war is a war for justice. The only justice is that which is restorative. If you're not fighting a just war for what is yours, you're fighting a war of liberation. Wars of liberation frees one man from the oppression of another. Wars of liberation do not free the third man from the oppression of the other two. If a man fights for freedom, ask him what he will do with his freedom when achieved. Liberty for its own sake is the freedom of a child. Only emotionally pampered children desire freedom for its own sake. Freedom is an emotional reaction based on pathos and ego. There is no objective freedom. Emotion does not have objectivity. Those who fight for freedom fight for emotional catharsis. The wise man fights for justice. Justice is based on ownership. Ownership is tied to authorship. Only the author has a claim to what he authored. We have no claim on what was authored by others. Without an illicit claim on the creation of others, what is freedom? Freedom is not possible without some degree of plagiarism. The free always scavenge. Freedom seekers are scavengers. The side you are on is defined by the objectives of your strategy. Poor strategy has you fighting for the enemy rather than against. To fight the enemy, understand what he is fighting for. If he is not fighting for what is yours, he is not your enemy. To know your enemy, know who is fighting against what you are fighting for. There are only two classes of persons, those who fight with you and those who war against you. Those who do not fight do not matter. Never let the enemy define your objectives or place of battle. If your enemy wants freedom and you do not, allow the enemy their freedom. If your enemy wants freedom and your freedom and you want freedom, who are you and who is your enemy? If all you fight for is power, you will not win. Power is freedom because power is a catharsis of emotion. Power has two manifestations or two principles. The two principles or axioms of power are might makes right and the end justifies the means. Power acquired gives rise to laws. Laws are based on opinions. Laws are opinions codified. Opinions are emotions verbalized. Laws are emotional reactions codified into a regulatory framework. Laws validate emotional reactions to phenomenological triggers. What a person with power does not like becomes illegal. Emotional reactions are validated by making the trigger of the emotions illegal. Freedom, in its most sublime sense, is the power to make things illegal. The free never ask who owns what or who authored what. They merely want to know who will pay. The owner of equity always pays costs created by a freeloader. The only thing worth fighting for is your rights as an owner, not to pay the costs of others. If you cannot pay your costs, then you cannot fight for the rights of owners. There is only one line of division in this world, and only two groups of persons. There are owners of equity, and there are freeloaders. No other groups matter. They are a distraction. We either own what we have and pay our costs, or we are a freeloader. A freeloader is a human cuckoo. One either pays the cost of one's existence through his or her own devices, or one does not. This is an economic distinction with economic correlates established in and through bookkeeping. The division between right and wrong, good and evil, have an economic correlate. The war is a war of economics or of business principles. In conventional parlance, the war is between capitalism and socialism, or between free markets and social agendas, or the right and left, or between conservatism and liberalism. Conservatives must support owners and free markets and abolish freeloading. The left needs socialism and cannot coexist with the sovereign rights of owners. The weakness of a parasite is that it is a parasite. Parasites are as interested in keeping their host alive as the host is in staying alive. The success of a parasite is the same as a failure of a parasite. Success for the right is cleansing the body politic of the infestation of parasitic elements. Parasites need the support of law and regulations to persist. Law validates the exactions of parasites. This is called a social agenda. A social agenda is a program of parasitism and its validation. By eliminating laws and establishing justice, parasitism is eliminated. The war is a war of principalities and powers and spiritual wickedness in the highest of places. The war is a validation of the abominations of man. Justice cannot be abrogated, rescinded, or delayed, or it is not justice. Justice is a free market operation, free of regulations. Implementing justice is the operation of the mechanisms of the free market. Capitalism must be freed of the demons of possession that claim what is not their own. The war is a spiritual war because it is a war of spiritual things, not physical things. The war is over rights and values. The war is about justice and who has a right to the things of this world, the values they represent. We own only what we create. No one can claim anything created by another. No one created the physical world other than God. No one has a claim on anything physical but God. All that is physical belongs to the creator of that which is thought physical. This is God. God is the highest, most perfect of all conceptions. If you think of something lesser or less than perfect, that is not God. God owns what he created, and man's owns what man creates. Man does not create ex nihilo. Man, as a creation of God, creates as a subject or abstraction of God. Man adds value to what was formed by God. Man owns the value created by him, but not the rock formed by God. Man is entitled to payment for his work as a laborer, but not for the work done by the Creator as God. The war is about claiming what belongs to God. A house divided against itself cannot stand. Those who claim nature as their own puts them on the same trajectory as that of Satan. We cannot own the natural world. We can only add value to it. We can get paid for our labor. We cannot rightly be paid for the ex nihilo work of God. The war, taken down to its most simple components, is about who ought to be paid for what. Justice, in its most basic formulation, is about assigning costs and benefits in accordance with the principles of proper accounting. A cost created is a cost properly assigned to the originating account. A benefit created is a benefit properly credited to the account of the originator of that benefit. The war is a war of accountants and the rules of proper accounting. The war is a war concerning bookkeeping. It's a war about what records we are keeping and our justification for how we keep our books. The master record is God's book of life. Messianics is man's attempt to replicate the record keeping of God. The ledger keeper is called an exchange. Exchanges are an attempt to replicate the church model given in Scripture. All assets are given to the church for preservation and protection in the name of God. The church, as a representative of Christ on earth, owns the resources within a political jurisdiction. No person owns what he or she did not create. All assets, all capital, is under the trusteeship of the church or exchange. The people of God represents God's authority on earth. Our authority is a collective authority, not a personal authority. All that is not needed for personal use is assigned to the keeping of the collective body of believers. To do this, an account has to be created to represent the believer. All the believer donates is recorded in his or her account as a credit. All the member acquires or consumes is recorded as a debit to his account. When a person adds value to an asset, he or she is credited for the value added. In this sense, the church utilizes the labor theory of value. When people see the opportunity to work together to help one another, they form an exchange. The exchange is a ledger that contains the accounts of the members. 2 or 3 persons can form a basic exchange. An exchange can grow to as many as 15 persons. As the group becomes too large to meet in homes, it splits into 2 specialized groups. Each exchange is customized in some way and focuses on a particular way of helping. The exchanges are organized in 2 ways, by occupation and by jurisdiction. Exchanges are specialized groups of from 2 to 15 persons. Each exchange has a chairperson who chairs the meeting. Exchanges are focused on an occupational specialization or a geographical based jurisdiction. The chairperson of one level forms a council that becomes the next higher level. If the council is a specialization, the chairs form a limited council. Limited councils administrate the affairs of a specific occupational sector, of which there are 12. General councils deal with intersectional issues and those tied to location. Exchanges have 12 levels of jurisdictional administration. The church, as the supreme administrative body, is 12 levels high and 12 sectors wide. The council serve as the legislative and jurisprudential arms of the church. When issues arise forgiveness is the first option. The second option is to ask for clarification if needed, compensation for specific and measurable harm experienced because of the other person's actions. Justice is restorative. It restores value lost. The third step is to ask for an intervention and adjudication by associates on an informal basis. The fourth step is a formal adjudication before a council. If the issue is tied to one's occupation, a limited council is the proper forum. If the issue is more general and tied to several different sectors or is geographical in nature, then a general council is convened. Adjudication generally results in recompense or a restoration of lost value, or a banning, that is, an exclusion from membership.